From FingerLakes1.com, this is Inside the FLX. I'm Josh Durso, and today we're talking with one of the few environmental reporters tackling the full menu of issues and storylines impacting the Finger Lakes region, whether it's the proposed gas storage facility under Seneca Lake, the ever-growing landfill in Seneca Falls, or the newly planned incinerator in Romulus. Peter Mantius has been at the center of it all. You've probably read some of his stories online. WaterFrontOnline.Blog serves as the home for most of his reporting. But today we have him in studio. Thanks a lot for being here, Peter.
Good to be here.
So I guess first and foremost, let's get our listeners used to who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your personal background.
Sure. I live in Watkins Glen. My wife and I moved up to the area about 12 years ago. From Long Island. I grew up on Long Island, but went to school in the South and then was a career journalist mostly in the South. 17 years in Atlanta at the Atlanta Constitution, primarily as a financial and legal and political reporter. I also had jobs in New York City and on Long Island and in Hartford, Connecticut. And previously, I was not an environmental reporter, but moving up to this area, it's the environmental issues that jumped out at me. And of course, they're very linked in to the political and to the legal and to the business.
Now, why do you think the environmental issues are at the sort of forefront here in the region, beyond the fact that it's just, the lakes are such a predominant feature here in the region?
Well, part of it may be lack of a lot of good journalism that is digging into the issues. I think that companies try to take advantage of situations where the people are not as active as they should be in really defending their area.
Now, obviously, a ton of issues locally. The Crestwood Gas Storage proposal is probably the one most people have heard about or have read about, especially if they live in the southern portion of the Finger Lakes. Give us an update, if you can, on where things stand right now in that particular fight. Obviously, there was a sale that happened, but the sale didn't really do what a lot of people thought it might do. Talk to us about where that stands right now.
Sure. Well, the sale, people assumed that with the sale of the salt plant, that Crestwood would be leaving the area, but no, they have retained the rights to the LPG storage, assuming they can get the permit. And so now we're waiting to see whether the DEC is going to grant the permit or deny it. And we're sort of at the last stages of the legal filings. In fact, I believe today is the deadline for the final filings by the DEC and Crestwood in their long battle to try to get this permit through. So we could easily see a decision on this after, this started I think in 2009 or 10. We could see a decision conceivably by the end of the year, but probably early next year, I would think.
Now, for those who might not have the background, how long has, you say you called it a long battle, how long has this issue, in particular with the gas storage proposal, been churning about around Watkins Glen?
I believe that the application for a permit was the end of 2009, and then I think there was the determination to have an environmental impact statement in late 2010, and from that point the communities became really energized about it and alerted to it, and then gradually the wine industry got involved. You had Gas Free Seneca develop, and you had We Are Seneca Lake, which are two separate organizations that sort of have different approaches to fighting this. And now We Are Seneca Lake has somewhat fallen back, and now it's sort of the other group that is leading the legal fight against the project.
Now, obviously not the only news connected to Seneca Lake. News around Cargill, actually some breaking news around Cargill. Talk to us a little bit about that. And you obviously, you wrote a nice story on this, I believe it was late yesterday? You
Right.
published that story. Talk
Right.
to us about what that is and where that stands right now with Cargill.
Well, this has to do with Cargill's really huge salt mine under Cayuga Lake. And it is it's about 6 or 7 miles long. It covers a good part of the southern half of the lake. And this issue's been brewing for quite a while. What happened a couple of days ago is the town of Ithaca, the city of Ithaca, the town of Romulus, and a couple of other jurisdictions got together with a group called CLEAN, which is the Cayuga Lake Environmental Action Now, or something like that. It's a community group. They have filed suit against the DEC and Cargill over a permit that the DEC granted Cargill a few months ago. But the concern is that that as Cargill does this salt mine under the lake and moves gradually up to the north, the bedrock separating the mine and the lake gets thinner and thinner. Mm-hmm. And some of these independent scientists are saying that there's a concern that there are parallels to the Retzoff mine, which about 70 miles to the west, which collapsed in 1994, and it had been the largest salt mine in North America, and it collapsed and it sucked an entire aquifer into it, mm-hmm. and it caused a lot of havoc, a mm-hmm. lot of settling, a lot of roads, bridges, houses were all affected. So there's this concern that the worst case scenario, that something similar could happen with this mine, that could be flooded. Mm-hmm. And that's what the suit is really about.
Now, of course, the latest, an incinerator in Romulus.
Right.
Before we get into the actual issue, I've been cautious to ask every single person who's come in to talk about this. How surprised were you when this proposal popped up?
Well, I didn't see it coming at all. Yeah. Obviously, this is an area that has more landfills than anywhere else in New York State. There's a real concentration of it probably within 30 or 40 miles of Geneva. You have the top 3 landfills in the state. So it's an area that seems to be ripe for this. And a lot of the waste that's coming in is not locally generated. It's being imported. So given the fact that this is an established area where the trucks know to come, it does lend itself in some ways to something like this. There are 10 other waste incinerators around the state, though, and this would be the largest in the state. And to me, one of the bigger questions is, and what I'm still trying to dig into, is who is really behind this? They remain quite mysterious. It's a limited liability company that was formed earlier this year called Circular Energy, with a very funny spelling. But we don't know who they are. Mm-hmm. And now the very nice man is the attorney for Circular Energy, but
Mr. Alan Knopf,
yes,
who
exactly.
also represented Seneca County.
Very experienced environmental attorney, and but we still don't know who these people are, who is really behind it.
What do you make of the statement that Mr. Knopf made during one of the presentations, actually 2 of the presentations, one in Romulus and then more recently last week at the County Board of Supervisors meeting, that every environmentalist should support this proposal? What do you make of that type of, it seems like a very assertive thing to say, especially in a region where there is so much landfilling and so many environmental risks already present?
Well, it's very controversial. The waste to energy industry, as they like to call themselves, certainly says that they tout their advantages, and there are advantages clearly over just piling up the waste in landfills. But there are other issues also. There is the traffic. You have to bring the stuff in. And the air quality issue also has to be monitored very carefully. And that's probably been the biggest knock on the industry nationwide, or air quality issues. Now the DEC is responsible for regulating that, and so we have to rely on them to do a good job.
Mm-hmm. Now, all of these environmental issues, including the Seneca Meadows issue, which is one of the large landfill entities that has been debated, regulated by the DEC, but at the same time, there seems to be somewhat of a lack of, it seems mixed. Sometimes there seems like there's a lack of confidence in the regulation that's being put forward, and then other times it seems like some residents are begging for the DEC to come in and take a really harsh stance. Where do you sort of, in reporting on all of this, where do you sort of land on how the DEC has handled everything up to this point?
Well, as with a lot of other big projects, I think the DEC is under enormous pressure from the companies, the people who are seeking permits. They're seeking to be treated as lightly as possible by the regulators. That's what every company does. So I think it's important for the DEC to sometimes resist the pressure of companies to push them around, frankly. Now, in the last year, there's been a lot of concern at Seneca Meadows and in Seneca Falls and Waterloo about odors and smells. Well, the air permit for Seneca Meadows expired in 2012, and it's right now in the process of being updated. But why has that taken so long? I don't know. I haven't been around covering this story for the last 5 years, but that's the first thing that jumps out to me. Now, the DEC routinely allows these permits to expire, and they say that it's fine. You can continue your operation as long as you have filed an application to renew, and that gives them an indefinite extension. Mm-hmm. And as we can see in the case of Seneca Meadows, they often take advantage of that option to take an indefinite pause.
Does that tell you that the DEC might be a little inundated with these various issues, and since they are falling behind in such a way? There probably are staffing issues that I don't really know in great detail, but I know that there have been some big cutbacks over the last 10 years. A lot of cutbacks at the DEC. But also, I think it goes to, again, the pressure that they're put under by the applicants, who applicants constantly want to sidestep full environmental impact statements. They want regulation light. That's their goal. And I don't totally blame the companies for that. I think it's really incumbent on the DEC to stand up to them and to say, well, yes, this is what you want, but the law actually says this. And this is what we're going to do. Now, obviously, as someone who runs a blog that's dedicated to a single specific wing of issues in the environment, what do you think of the new sort of platforms that have seemed to really help people connect on these types of issues, whether it be social media, whether it be online blogs, or just the growth in general of people being more communal online with regard to issues like this? It seems like to me, if it weren't for places like social media and blogs like yours, a lot of people in the region wouldn't have connected as quickly as they did and assembled the way they did on these issues.
Yeah, I think social media had a huge impact in the fracking battle, and I think without social media, there would not be a fracking ban in New York State now. I think it was very instrumental in that. I think as we've seen a decline in daily newspapers, including my own newspaper, the one that I worked for so long in Atlanta. I mean, you see it everywhere. Everybody's affected, and all the staffs are getting cut back. As newspapers have declined, there has been this the sort of a silver lining that we are really seeing the growth and the potential of social media to get the word out.
Now, as newspapers have declined over the years, is that necessary? Do you think that's a lot of people ask us, especially since we're a purely digital news organization, they'll say, what can these organizations do, these traditional platforms? What can they do to reinvent themselves, to make themselves more friendly in a less friendly environment for them operationally, because it does cost a lot of money to produce that daily paper? What do you think, as someone who worked in the industry for so long, some of the upside is for that type of platform?
I think it's very tough for that platform. I think that the problem is the business model has sort of collapsed. The traditional newspaper used to get its revenue really from subscriptions, from display ads, and from classified ads. Things like Craigslist and the internet totally took away classified ads. I mean, virtually took it away. Mm-hmm. So that was like, if it's the three-legged stool, that's one leg of the stool, it's gone, and that's not coming back. And so it's very, very difficult for these organizations to really to be really profitable. Newspapers used to be very profitable, but not anymore. And I don't see it coming back.
Now, obviously, with you being able to focus in one set area, puts you at a big advantage, because you can focus on that area. Sort of the modern day investigative reporting, that seems to have been the thing that has disappeared and left most people like, oh, what are we going to do? How necessary, how important is that investigative reporting to really to go way beyond the surface of the issue and really dig into what the issues are and what the current is behind what people are seeing on a daily basis?
Well, I'm a little biased on this, but I think it's obviously critical to have it, because I think that right now the balance of power is a little bit in favor of the companies that are trying to have their way. The Crestwoods, the Cargills, the people that own Seneca Meadows. These guys have not only their own economic power, but they have their law firms and their lobbyists and stuff that are working on the DEC constantly. And a lot of times what you have are citizen groups that are relatively small. They're shoestring operations. There's no particular organization to them many times. And so it's a little bit of an uneven playing field. And I think that the issues that they're raising, though, are really, really important. They have a hard time getting voice to those issues. So I am trying to help give voice to some of the issues that I think are really valid issues and they're legally valid, and they deserve more prominence.
Now, biggest surprise, you say you've been here covering this for several years now. Biggest surprise so far that has either happened or in coverage or just in your day-to-day sort of experience of these things? What's been your biggest surprise in the Finger Lakes so far?
Well, I've been very encouraged to see these small citizen groups just sprout up in response to some of these applications, and I think it's going to happen also with the Romulus incinerator. I think what you'll see is citizens groups are going to get together and they're going to try to fight it. Just as gas-free Seneca grew out of nothing, and the clean group over in Ithaca is trying to deal with the salt mine under the lake there. There's a group in Dresden that is concerned about the Greenwich power plant. So we see these little groups of concerned citizens that are rising up, and they're often taking the DEC to court to try to press their point.
Biggest challenge that remains for the Finger Lakes region moving forward over the next several years?
Well, I think there are a lot of issues with these lakes that it's not just the big projects. It's also the invasive species. It's the whole HABs issue, the toxic so-called toxic algae. That's a big issue that's going to be I think extremely important for the Finger Lakes over the next few years. And I think it's coming back. We will see it next summer. I think this past summer there were ideal conditions for it to just completely take off, and it did in late September, and all of the Finger Lakes were affected this year. And I think about 7 of the Finger Lakes had high toxins, which is very concerning.
Is that the biggest issue? If you aren't watching the industrial side of it, is that the big issue? Because that seems to have grown every year. The impact of these algae blooms seem to be more and more spotted. Obviously, this past summer seemed to be the biggest. Is the state doing enough, do you feel, or is this something that the state hasn't actually really had enough time to catch up to and get out in front of?
I do think they're really trying to jump on it. I think the DEC is trying to address it, and they're doing a good job, I think, trying to work with local citizens groups that want to monitor the lakes. And I think Seneca Lake has a very good monitoring system through Seneca Lake Pure Waters, and they've done a great job. And I think they've really helped the DEC address this. No, I think the DEC is trying, and I think it's a very complex issue. And it's not an easy issue to solve. I think that the fertilizers and things that are getting into the lake, that are creating the nutrients that are the breeding ground for it. Also, the temperature of the water is important. But they're trying to figure out what they can do to mitigate the problem. But it's coming back.
Well, we really appreciate you coming in today to talk to us about some of these, and I'm sure we'll be having you back again in the next 3 months to sort of continue to give us an update on where all of these really important issues stand.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Well, that's going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Peter for stopping by, and of course our listeners and FingerLakes1.com for making this podcast possible. Inside the FLX airs Sundays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum Channel 12 and is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Remember, all 88 of our episodes here are available on FingerLakes1.tv as well. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.